Cashmaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Daryl W. and I, wow. Daryl W4 and I are back again because we love geocaching with episode 129 of the GeoGearHeads. Talking again with a repeat and, may I add, favorite guest of the show and supporter, John Robb of Cache at Night. We're anxious to get to that, but I think many of our viewers and even our listeners are even more anxious to hear who won this week's drawing.
Yeah, I expect you're probably right, Bad Cop. And there were actually two questions for two possible drawings in episode 128. The going caching question is still open till next week, so if you want to try to get your answer in for that one, you have to listen to last week's show and get that in. But question 129 just closed Wednesday, and every one of those entries submitted had the correct answer. So the Tower of Song was drawn as the winner for that GX Proxy prize pack, and they'll need to email geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com their mailing address as a postal address by July 3rd to claim that prize.
Well, congratulations, and apparently the question we asked was just too easy if everybody got it right. That question was, when did development work start on Glonass? The correct answer, according to Wikipedia, and if Wikipedia doesn't have the right answer, no one does, was 1976. Now, I was surprised to find that Glonass was that old. What about you, Daryl?
Yeah, same. Especially, since I hadn't heard anything really about it until a couple of years after I was geocaching, so I guess that puts it sometime around 2008.
Yeah, and it's just recently that they've been integrated, or that Glonass has been integrated into some of the chipsets with the standard GPS. That's mainly because of our good Russian friend, and I'd like to say he's a friend of mine, Vladimir Putin. I've never met him, but I'd like to say he was a friend. He made a concerted effort to restore the system, and that became a priority sometime in the early part of the century, and it wasn't until 2010 that full coverage was restored for Russia's territory. Then, October 2011, the full 24-satellite orbital constellation was restored. So it really wasn't usable until just recently.
Yeah, now stay with us through the end of the show, as we'll have another question for show 130. And if you like your prizes, you'll want to join us live for Randomized 24 with Scott Burks as our special guest next week. That's June 26th at 9:10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 6:10 Pacific, through the Google Plus Hangout on Air, and you can watch that through the YouTube stream as well. But we've got a coin from geocaching.com and a pile of swag from Glimpse we'll be giving away during that show. But all of that is only for the live show. If you'd like your chance to win any of that prize pool, you'll have to watch us live.
Now, John, I understand not only do you have incredible decorating sense. I mean, if the people are watching, they're going to see, wow, this guy has feng shui down to an art. But I understand you have a special prize for someone watching or listening this episode.
I do indeed have a special prize. We have just started at Cache at Night to produce our own stencils. And the lucky geocacher here that wins that stencil will get the geocaching stencil and the number stencil, so they can use that for their UV or other types of caches to stencil some numbers. And all they need to do is email in the answer to what does BFL stand for by 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, June 26th. But what's that address again, Bad Cop?
Well, the only address you'll ever want to email is geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com. So, John, you said, what does BFL stand for? As in Bfl Boot Camps that you help host every fall?
That's right. So email geogearheads@cashmaniacs.com with what you think BFL stands for, and you tell us what you think. I don't know what I'm going to tell you it stands for, but you tell us what you think it stands for, and send in your screen name in the body, and give the subject of BFL question, and have it emailed to GeoGearHeads at GeoGearHeads at CacherManiacs.com by 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on June 26th, and I might be sending you that very same stencil.
Yeah, that would be very useful, and as you mentioned, it could be used for UV, among other things, so I'm sure we'll end up talking about that later. We have not had the chance, though, to introduce you properly yet, but long-term GeoGearheads will know you, John Robb, well for your 4 other appearances on the show. You've been on episode 58 talking about UV light, 66, caching lights, 92, night caches, our first show. This is Night Caches 2 now. And then most recently, 108, talking about caches with lasers. Now, they'll also recognize Cache at Night as a former sponsor of the GeoGearHeads and donor of many of the prizes. And John, you actually cache as Team Voyager and, as we mentioned, helped out with those Bfl Boot Camps. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Yes, you're missing that we need to become a sponsor again. So you'll talk to me about that after the show, and we'll figure out how to make that happen.
It will indeed.
Chris had mentioned something, so we'll give anybody that's watching, we'll give them a view. That's the view of my very empty apartment. That's because I am moving to a new house tomorrow. Which
explains the echo as well. It's not that you're living in a cave right now. You're not hiding from the FBI or the NSA.
No, none of those things are the case. Although I was in a cave on the weekend. I was at the Runestone Cache up near Collingwood in Ontario. It's one of my favorite caches of all times. It's just absolutely a fantastic cache. But that's neither here nor there.
Awesome.
Well, it's apparently there because I was here and, well, it wasn't here.
Okay, true enough.
Okay, well, we already have questions. The opening question comes from Wet Coaster, who's a fellow Canadian, though on the other coast. And he asked via Google+, which is better, headlamp or handheld flashlight? If you're going old school, a burning torch.
I love the idea of burning torch, but it has a few too many connotations. So we're going to say that one's not the right one. But I do love this question. My answer would be both. But if I had to pick one light for night caching, I'd go with the headlamp. The light travels where you're looking, so wherever you turn your head, that's where the light goes. And a headlamp is highly recommended, especially if you're doing a fire attack cache, which we might talk about here tonight.
Well, you have mentioned fire attacks before in one of the other 4 shows. So can you tell us once again what they are?
Fire attacks are a brand name for reflective trail markers. They kind of originally came from hunters that would mark their trails out. That's where they came from. Fire attacks, though, are super bright compared to some of the other kind, and they come in a variety of colors. And I think that fire attacks make a really excellent first choice for a night cache for somebody that's starting it out as a first-timer.
Nice. So why would you suggest fire attacks as a first-time choice in a night cache?
There's a few reasons why you might want to do that, not the least of which is that somebody looking for that cache doesn't need anything more than a flashlight or a headlamp. The fire attacks themselves come in a variety of colors. There's 4 colors that they come in. And that allows you to make some choices in terms of how you go about placing the cache.
Nice. So, how do they work? I mean, do they require batteries? How hard are they to put up?
They're really easy to put up. They're kind of like a thumbtack. No batteries required. And anybody that's ever driven at night has seen the same kind of technology used in a street sign. So the way a fire attack works is any light that hits the reflector is bounced back or reflected back, reflective being a little bit of a misnomer, and it comes back to the source of the light. It comes right back to the source of the light, and that's why they're called retroreflective. The light itself is actually bounced around inside little tiny glass prism, or not glass prism, well I guess glass prisms, little glass beads, and it acts like a prism, and it actually refracts the light back out to the viewer.
Ooh, light refracting. Oh, no, that
Okay.
may not be what we wanted to go for. Um, so they're like the red and white stickers we see on trucks, right?
That's right. Yeah, same kind of
Okay.
idea.
Okay. So how do you use it for finding a cache? I mean, if they're just reflective, how do you go about putting this out?
But the simplest form of a FireTAC cache would be where you give the finder a set of coordinates, they go to that starting place, and then they look around for the fire tags, and then they follow the fire tags to the end of the trail, and wherever the end is, they stop, and that's where the cache is. That's the simplest, really easy way for somebody to do it.
Nice. Now, oh, go ahead, Daryl.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that I've seen a few of those situations like that with the fire tags. They're nice and easy, mostly in the woods, but not so much, like in a parking lot or something. And those are more of the caches that I've been doing lately. And we did talk about this in some of the other episodes. So if anyone's really interested in finding out more, they can probably check out some of that stuff. But we're kind of looking more for beginners this time, not for the guys who have the BFL experience that you have up your way. So what about for those novice night cachers?
So for the novice night cacher, they can do something that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And this was actually, I know you mentioned BFL a couple of times, and those guys are just they were at one time a bunch of frozen lunatics when they went caching out in the ice. And so the BFL Boot Camp, Boot Camp 1, Northern Penguin, he took a bunch of fire tacks and he put them inside old film canisters. And what that does is makes the fire tack very directional. So you can only get it to bounce the light back when you're looking straight at it. And when this particular cache, he placed them in a circle about 100 feet across. It might have been a little bit more. And when you stood right in the center of the cache, or right in the center of the circle, that's where the cache was. So if you were off one way a little bit to the left, you didn't see all of the reflectors. You had to go to where you could see all of the reflectors in a ring all the way around you. So it's no advanced technology. It's film canisters and fire tacks, and you just have to place them in a circle. So that still works for a novice, but that was actually a BFL cache. That was BFL number 1. So it's a little bit more advanced than just a straight line, and you can do anything like that with fire tacks if you use a little bit of creativity.
Interesting. I do like that approach because that's different than anything I've seen before. Though, I know a lot of us don't read the cache pages, so we might not realize that's what we have to do. So I could see a bunch of people just walking around in that circle trying to figure out where the cache is.
Yes, that's a good point.
So is that like the typical kind of night cache that people expect from the BFL Boot Camp?
Don't I wish it was that easy these days? We've come a long way since then, and we keep pushing ourselves. But you really, seriously, you have to come and try it. You're only a few hours away, Daryl. Come and try the boot camp.
Yeah, it's one of those things I keep saying I've got to do it one time, at least one time. And no matter what, it seems to be a scheduling conflict. But we're talking about the fire tax right now, and I like that idea of the circle. Is there anything else that really comes up in maybe the BFL boot camps or otherwise that would be another great suggestion?
Well, I've seen a number of ways to use fire tax and use the color elements inside, or not inside, but as part of the process. So there is the Firefly Yellow, Blaze Orange, Diamond White, and Stealth Brown. If you have a trail of one color and then you place a fire tack with a different color, say the Blaze Orange, you can put in the cache description, which nobody reads, you can put in there, when you see an orange, turn right. Or when you see a firefly yellow, turn left. And you can use that as a way to make it a little bit trickier for someone to find the cache, because they don't just follow it straight to the end. You actually follow it past where you're supposed to turn right, and sure enough, there's another fire attack just past that, and invariably, people just see the fire attacks in front of them and they keep following them. They don't realize, oh, I'm supposed to change direction. And that could be a little bit of a trick that you might want to do on someone. And I know that if you come to a Bfl Boot Camp, nothing is as it seems. You'll get burned if you just follow a straight line.
Nice. Nice. And, who doesn't want to move towards the light? Really, that's what you're saying. So, John, you've mentioned how to make the paths. Really, when is the best time to place fire attacks? Should you place them during the day or at night?
We do most of our placements at night, primarily because you want to make sure that someone can actually see the line of sight onto the fire attack. These are basically, it's a straight line from the viewer to the fire attack. So if anything is in the way, like a tree or something like that, you're not going to be able to see that. And so when you try and place them during the day, you don't necessarily get to see exactly what's in its way, because when you stand back, you can't see, like let's say it was a stealth fire attack, you can't see that from anywhere more than, say, 4 or 5 feet away from the fire attack. You get to 10 feet and you won't even be able to see it. So you kind of have to do that at night so that you know exactly where that fire attack is and how it gets there. Not to mention, you sort of also want to know what's it like walking along that path at night. Even if you're wearing a headlamp, I know the question in the beginning was which light do you use, and I say both. The headlamp illuminate what's in front of you, and hopefully you won't trip on anything, but it's not the same as walking during daylight. It really is different.
Yeah, well, the point about the stealth decks not being as bright at night is a really good point, because if you're going to be using those, you're going to have whatever you're putting them on closer together, and you're going to have a whole lot more of them.
Well, the fire attacks themselves, the stealth fire attacks, they're just as visible. It's just during the day, because they're brown, they blend into the tree, and they're really, really hard to see, which is why they're called stealth. Ron from Cache at Night, he actually did an interesting thing with some geotacks, is he took the retroreflective part off, painted them camo, and then sprayed them with UV paint, and put those on the tree, so you had to actually have a UV flashlight to follow that trail, which again is a slight variation on a theme, but that was pretty neat. I'd never seen that done before, and I thought that was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, those fire attacks blended right into the tree. You had to be within 2 feet of those to see them. It was really neat.
Wow. But you're talking about going out at night to actually place these things, so I'm assuming then it's going to be a two-person job, because you need someone to kind of shine the light and another one to actually place the fire attack?
Well, anytime you do night caching, I like to recommend that you go as 2 people. Bad things happen, you fall down, whatever. It's nice to have somebody there with you. I have gone out sort of at dusk. Dusk is also a good time to place fire attacks, because it's just dark enough that the fire attack will work, but it's still bright enough that you can see kind of what's going on. And so in general, we do recommend a 2-person approach. And what we sometimes do is we have one person stand back and the other person place the fire attack, and then they say if they can see it from where they're standing. This is in particular important when you are talking about changing directions. One of the things that happens with fire attacks is you can see them over a wide angle, and if you don't place them correctly on the tree, you kind of give away where you want the person to go, because they can see it before they actually get to the fire attack. It's all about placement and figuring out how to do that and practicing a little bit.
We got a bunch more Q&As coming in. Mike asked, do you need to set up the fire tack trail at night, or is there a way to do it during the day?
Well, you can certainly do it during the day, but when you do it during the day, you have to go back and test it at night. You have to see that it actually works. For instance, you might place the fire tacks too close together, because during the day you can't actually see them from a distance, so you place them too close. You don't necessarily want them too close. You might want them, 50 to 100 feet apart, depending on where you're placing them, so that you can't. You don't want to give too much away. You want people to sort of go to one fire tack and then see the next one and proceed that way, instead of getting it like runway lights where whoom, you've got a big long set of lights and exits on the left, exits in the front, disco lights on the floor. You don't necessarily want that effect when you're doing the night cache. Part of what makes night caching fun is the sort of the same thing that makes a scary movie fun is the anticipation. The music plays, and that's what happens when you're out caching at night. So if you make it too obvious, you take some of that away, and you want to create a little bit of that tension.
I could see like a Daft Punk theme going though with the laser lights like that. We do have a question though from Wet Coaster again. Do you prefer putting them up high on trees or on posts?
Well, this was it was something I was going to talk about a little bit later, but we can talk about it now. Is fire tacks are best placed at about eye level. Especially for a guy like me, I wear a headlamp. If it's at eye level, it's going to come back straight at my eyes. It all works really well. That being said, if you're doing it in more of an urban environment, you might want to place them a little bit higher so that when someone's walking, it's not in their line of vision. Because if somebody sees it in their line of vision, they might get curious and they might come and look at it. So if you imagine a trail, many times you put the fire tacks on the first tree off of the trail. And that makes it easiest for people to see at night, but also makes it easiest for people to see during the day. You can put it on the next tree in off of the trail. So not the first tree, but one a little bit further in. The fire tacks are so bright that you'll be able to see it even if it's off the trail a little bit, and you just keep following them. And that'll make it harder for someone to see during the day, because you don't necessarily want them to get muggled. So best is at eye level, but if you're a little bit concerned about somebody finding them, you can put them a little bit higher. And if you want to change the complexity, then you can put them higher, and you can even put them lower. I saw one cache that actually used red reflectors down low, and it was a Halloween theme, and the idea was that this was something looking at you. I did see one totally awesome cache. This was so much fun, this cache. And the cache takes you to a certain place, and then you look up a hill, and looking back at you are all these sets of two eyes. And it was a whole series of fire tacks. Some were yellow, some were orange, some were white, and they all looking back at you as if all these animals were looking back at you. But because you were down at the bottom of the hill and then you had to turn and look up, you don't see them until you get there, and then all of a sudden you look up and that's what you see. And he had actually even taken a retroreflective rope and he wrapped it around the tree as if it was a snake. It was a really well done cache.
Awesome. Now, we've got another question from Wet Coaster. This is one of the reasons why I absolutely love these live Q&As, because this is not a question I would have ever thought about. Trees move the tacks as the tree grows, so how often do you maintain to make sure the tacks point in the right direction?
The tree growing is generally not that big of an issue. What is an issue is animals that climb the tree or ice and frost that gets in behind the fire tack and pushes it off. The fire tack itself is really not much bigger than a thumbtack, so there's not a lot of pointy metal in the tree. And when it's in the tree, it doesn't take much to kind of, an animal to pull it off or some frost to pull it off. So they do from time to time just fall out of the tree, and then you have to go and maintain it. You can expect on average to do an annual maintenance run, which you probably should be doing anyway for most of your caches. So an annual maintenance run on a firetack cache is probably reasonable. I have one cache, and it starts with a yellow firefly, and I think I replace that almost every year. It just tends to go missing. I don't know where it goes. Maybe it gets stolen or whatever. But I have to go back every year.
It's the shiny objects that the squirrels are after.
Squirrel!
Now, Native Texan has a question that I'm sure a number of people want to know the answer to. When you get the trail done, how do you post it to Groundspeak? Do you use the trailhead as the first waypoint and do it as a multi or a puzzle or what?
Multi and or puzzle. It can go either way. Many times we use puzzle. The only reason I might not want to do a puzzle is because some people don't go for puzzles. If it's a puzzle, they don't go and look for it. Because it's not really a field puzzle. There's not really much that you have to kind of figure out. You just go to the start coordinates and then follow it from there. So multi is fine. You could go either way depending on the complexity of your cache. If you're going to be tricky and do some weird things, you might want to think about a puzzle, but a multi is fine.
All right. And the last question that we're going to take right now is from Mike, and he actually wants to know if there are good options for urban night caches.
This is a very good question. I know that the Bad Cop is contemplating placing a night cache in a parking lot, and this is a great place to do it. When you're thinking about an urban cache, let me step back a second. People often say, well, where can I place the night cache? And there's a few options you can place them. You can place them in somewhere that maybe has camping, because if it has camping, people are likely to be allowed there at night, and you could place it there. We place a bunch of our caches in what's called Crown Land, which is federally owned land, and they have fewer use restrictions, so we can place them there. Or maybe it's a place that has a, sort of a national or a state trail, like the Appalachian Trail, where people might be walking that in the evenings, and so that might be an alternative for you. But if you get to an urban environment, there's two places in an urban environment that I think would kind of work. One is a parking lot. I'm actually trying to think of how I can use a parking lot for a laser cache. I've got some ideas on that, and then I'm still kind of working through it. I like it for laser cache because it's very straight lines, right? There's nothing in the way. There's a couple lamp posts, and we can do some tricks along the way. The other way is maybe in a neighborhood that has tree-lined streets. If you use stealth geotachs on trees and you place them a little bit higher than eye level, somebody walking down the street is never going to see them. And that means that you could use them on the trees, maybe with a different color at maybe an intersection. So after this intersection, if it's yellow, then turn right. If it's orange, turn left, something like that. And then you could create around just a few streets some kind of an urban night cache. Caveat being, you're going to look a little weird using a flashlight on the trees in a suburban environment. So just be ready for maybe a few questions associated with that.
Interesting. Well, John, we've talked a lot about caching at night, but what really got you into night caching?
Well, where I live, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but where I live, we have about maybe 4 or 5 months where it's dark after 6 o'clock at night. So if you want to go caching after dinner, you're caching at night. And no plug intended. And if that's the case, then you're going to have some flashlights, a headlamp, whatever it is that you're using, and you're going to go caching at night. And the guys that started up the BFL group, they sort of thought, why don't we make this a little bit more interesting? Let's do something a little bit more fun. And that's sort of how the BFL Boot Camp got started. But it really boils down to, if you want to cache in any time after the fall, you're going to be caching at night, so why not make it more fun?
That's true. Now, we have spent a lot of time on firetack so far, but are there other techniques? You mentioned one, UV.
Yeah,
What
I
other
think that.
techniques are there for night caching? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that UV is another good entry level way. If you use the UV pen with some UV paper and create a pretty simple redirect that way, or as the image here shows, this is a real urban stealth pipe night cache where this is on a kind of a fence post. It's a gear clamp that was painted gray, and then there was some UV put on top of that. And that makes for a really interesting urban night cache that people just walk by and would never know it's there. The only caveat being finders need a UV light. And one of the things that you'll find with night caches is any night cache you put out is going to have fewer finders than if you put out a regular cache. Not everybody wants to cache at night. It really messes with some people. It's just not something they want to do. They're quite happy to go out when it's sunny and daylight, but if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's dark, not interested. So when you put out a night cache, doesn't matter what kind, you're going to get fewer people. The difference is they're going to love your cache.
Yeah, fewer people, a lot more effort going into the cache, and hopefully a lot more people giving you the favorite points for it too.
Yeah,
probably a really good way to get that ratio of favorites to finds up.
Well, there was shortly after one of my previous participations in the show, someone bought a whole bunch of items from the store, and he went out and placed a cache, and that cache, when I was following it, it had over 80% favorites. It was pretty close to 100%. Somebody actually didn't favorite it, and I'm like, you wrote a great log. Why wouldn't you favorite this? And instead of getting TFTC as the log entry, which we've all seen as a log entry, these log entries were like 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 paragraphs. People love this cache. I will say this was a BFL worthy cache. This was it had lasers, it had cryptics, it had UV, it had everything. It was unbelievable. It was a very cool cache. So much so that I'm even thinking about doing a road trip down to Rhode Island to do this cache. It is awesome.
Very cool. Now, we've talked about the UV. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead. We're dealing with lag here. That makes it confusing. I'm going to say if it's Rhode Island, with the distance you have to keep between caches, there may not be another cache in the entire state. Oh, sorry.
I think there's a few caches in Rhode Island, but
okay.
I don't think there's very many very cool night caches. But I will say that I did see an order today for someone that bought a green laser, a laser loci, a cryptics, UV monofilament, the UV pen. So I'm expecting that there's going to be a very cool new cache coming out soon. And I don't have it in front of me in terms of what city it's in, but somewhere can expect a very cool night cache.
Nice. I didn't know you sell cryptex.
Yeah, we started selling that last year. It's made for a totally different purpose. It's made as a sort of a gift, like a way to make a gift a little bit more interesting, and people seem to be liking it. It's an interesting kind of way to do the cache.
Nice.
Yeah, any of those pre-done containers make it a little bit easier to start out. But for people who are looking to get started in that UV cache, and again, we did a whole show on this, but can you kind of quickly give us a good starting place for someone who really just wants to put out their first UV cache?
If I was going to do my first UV cache and I wanted something really simple, a UV pen and the special paper that is available that doesn't reflect as much UV light back, that would be the simplest way to go as a first UV cache. So this is an example of how I recommend that people do it, is you have the paper and you put some dummy coordinates on in black ink. And then in UV pen, you put in the correct coordinates. And so now you have something that when somebody gets it, they go, oh, look, coordinates, and off they go. But in reality, they need to use the UV pen. And you might say to yourself, well, that doesn't seem very hard. Well, I can tell you from first-hand experience that even A regular night cacher BFL organizer was fooled by this trick. So it'll fool even the best of them out there, and it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Just about anybody can do it. You don't have to do multiple steps. It's one stage of a multi-cache. It's pretty straightforward, something everybody can do. So I think if I was going to do my first UV, that would be one way to go.
Nice.
Yeah, that's something nice, simple, easy. It would work well in a parking lot or on the back of a sign or just about anything. So it's a really versatile way to go too.
Yeah, you can use it anywhere. I mean, we happen to have a UV paint that you can actually paint onto things. Painting anything becomes a little bit problematic because you need to get permission. But the UV paint, I know that it's stable outdoors for greater than a year. I painted a post. I put some coordinates on a post just to see how long it would last. And even outside, it lasted for a year. And so that's a really neat way, if you can get permission from a parking lot, to put it on the light post as an example, where there's a light post during the day, looks just normal, but at night you come by with a UV light and boom, look at that. There's a number there.
Nice.
Speaking of which, you had mentioned the stencils in UV paint. Is that how you're going to be doing the numbers? Is just painting it, or is there maybe even a UV spray paint or something?
Well, you could use a UV spray paint, but everything I've done is just with the paintbrush and the stencil, or the pen and the stencil. And the stencil is it's just a way to make the numbers a little bit neater. You know, sometimes you just freehand it, and that's okay. But if you make them a little bit neater, that's nice too. And there is UV spray paint, but that's not an inexpensive option. You're looking at maybe $40 for a can of UV spray paint, and you're only going to use a little bit of it. So it's not for everyone.
And
it seems like you have a lot of overspray too, you know, especially when you're dealing with like those stencils.
Yeah, there's a lot of work there. One of the BFL organizers, he actually bought a printer and bought UV ink, and he printed photos in UV ink, and the photo was only available, viewable under UV light, and that was really cool. That was really cool. That was actually that was the clues for the final. So each BFL cache had one of these pictures in it, and you had to get numbers off of the picture that you used in order to figure out the final.
I had no idea you could get UV printer ink.
Yeah, well, to help put it in. Well, maybe it was a $500 investment.
Ooh, maybe I don't need that new toy.
Yeah. So that was a $500 investment for one of the BFL caches.
Okay. Well, maybe I can get
this is why people need to go to the BFL boot camps, is to go and find these really expensive, very cool caches.
Well, yeah, every year I do a poll within the organizers to see sort of what it is that they've spent. I think that about $600 was the maximum, but they're routinely into the hundreds of dollars. And some of these caches are just like, I had no idea. Some of them are super easy. One of the caches last year was Sharknado. It was basically a fire attack cache, and you just followed that. It had a really neat little theme, and it had great props. That's one of the other cool things you can do with a night cache, is use props. This one, it was Sharknado, so the props were these Halloween legs and feet and stuff. That was the props, you know, from the Sharknado. And I tell you, you see a Halloween prop during the day, it doesn't bother you. You see a Halloween severed foot underneath a tree at 12 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning, that's a different thing.
That's funny.
I definitely would have to agree with that. We do have a question, though, from Native Texan. If you use a UV pen on a sign or something, does it eventually become somewhat visible in daylight after it's been in the sun, heat, etc.?
The sun is the worst enemy for UV. It's absolutely the worst enemy. And over time, they tend to become a little bit more visible during the day. So you have to be really careful where you put them in order to make them A, less susceptible to UV, B, less brute forceable. So the stencil that we use is a 7-segment stencil, just like on a digital clock. And that means that you can do sort of whatever number you want, and then there's going to be gaps that aren't part of the number. So one of the tricks that we use is to have a red UV pen and a blue UV pen. So if you do your numbers in blue, you do the gaps in red. So that even when it does become sort of somewhat visible in daylight, all you're going to see is 888. And you can only get the real answer when you use the UV light at night. So that's one way to do that. And you can also substitute, if you're using paint, you can substitute clear nail polish as the other paint. So one is UV reactive and one isn't, but when you look at the paint on, say, a metal surface, it just looks like 8s. And again, that's not going to get you anywhere. And so there's a few tricks you can employ to make it so that you really can't brute force it, or it just becomes a lot harder, sufficiently hard that it's easier to do it at night.
Excellent. Now, there are a bunch of other shows in there in the feed that we mentioned earlier. If anyone's looking to really get into this, there's a lot of really great information in those other shows, so definitely check those out. Before we go, though, we have one last question from Mike, who wants to know what you're drinking.
Oh, is that visible? I was only doing that when somebody else was on the camera.
Yeah, it shows up in the little thumbnails. One of the downsides of live streaming, I guess.
Shoot. Well,
I'm drinking water.
Chris and I are just drinking water, but John decided to go a little further and turn it into one of those other shows tonight.
But doesn't that look like water? That looks like water, right? It's pretty clear. It looks like water.
Yeah. Well, it's UV reactive.
He went for the colored water.
Okay, here, I'll tell you a story. I was drinking something that's called the water of life. So, I was drinking whiskey, for those that absolutely have to know. It's a Highland Park. It's a very nice single malt scotch. But whiskey actually means the water of life. So, I was drinking water.
Sounds like another question we may have to use on another show.
That's a whole other episode.
Yes. And not one of our normal types of questions either. Well, thank you again for joining us. And we have got a wealth of information out there for people to check out on our show, but you have a lot more, including all of that great stuff on your site. So where can people find that?
www.cashatnight.com. And don't forget to come to the Bfl Boot Camp. I wore my shirt tonight to let everybody know with my retroreflective Big Dipper.
Oh, nice. See, you can't tell that in this light.
No, in this light you can't tell.
But for people who want to start making those plans, when is it that they can find those again?
Bfl Boot Camp this year is the Saturday of November 1. So if it's not November 1, it's November 2. I just don't know. But whatever that Saturday is, that's the Bfl Boot Camp.
Excellent. I didn't know that you actually had that date locked in yet. But that's a great event that everyone's going to want to hit. And
you're going to come this year, Daryl.
I hope so. That sounds like a date that probably won't have any conflicts, and I'm going to have to, after the show, get that date from you so that I can actually lock it in and make sure I don't have any other conflicts.
Yes, and bring your camera. Lots of great photo opportunities, and the Bfl Boot Camp is it's a ton of fun. It's a great time. People camped last year. You can camp this year. It's a lot of fun.
You really can.
And for the people like me who are. Yeah, I was going to say, the people like me who are wimps and can't take the outdoors that late in the year, there's a hotel nearby, right?
Well, I don't want to say that I'm in Canada and you're in America. I don't want to make this into a Canada-U.S. kind of thing, that in Canada we can camp in November. I don't want to say that, but BFL does stand for a bunch of frozen lunatics.
Well, that's one thing that it stands for.
That's
heard
one
a lot
thing
of other
that it
things.
stands for. Yes, that's one thing. There are a few others, and if I had
we've mentioned
more,
in some of the earlier shows.
Indeed.
Yes.
If I had more water, I might tell you a few more.
A bunch of fuzzy lemons. No.
I've never heard that one.
Okay. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great fun to come, and it's always wonderful hearing what people are asking, and hopefully they get something out of the show.
Great. And for all your night caching needs, head over to cacheatnight.com. Now, we can't express enough how much we appreciate the support of our donors and patrons. Without them, all of this wouldn't be possible. So after last week's show, we added a couple more patrons to the ranks, hitting our next milestone and allowing us to maintain the archives. So a quick note to our patrons, we're looking for times when we can do another patron hangout, so watch for that. We'd love to have you there. The last one was a lot of fun. You should head to this one too. If you'd like to pledge a monthly donation to help keep the GeoGearHeads coming and improve the show, visit GeoGearHeads.com or CacheManiacs.com and hit the Patreon link. You too then can become part of the show. There are many other ways, though, to do this. And also, along with that, there's special bonus material. So, and that special patron hangout. Now, companies like GX Proxy, Cache Advance, Project-GC, and one of our favorites, Cache at Night, contribute prizes for the weekly drawing. So once again, John, thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. We're happy to help.
And we really do appreciate it. And to everyone else who leaves iTunes reviews, shares the links on the shows in their social feeds, share it with with fellow cachers at events, on the trail. You can release travelers dedicated to the show. Thank you. Or simply just leave feedback. There's all sorts of ways you can become part of the show. So thank you.
And we have lots of great shows coming up too, and you can find the complete listing at geogearheads.com/upcoming, or just head to geogearheads.com and click the link. And as I mentioned earlier, next week is our show 130 Randomize 24 with special guest Scott Burks and a whole bunch of prizes for the live guys. So you want to make sure to schedule that one and make sure you're there at 9:10 p.m. Eastern or 6:10 p.m. Pacific for that live stream. And then July 3rd, we're going to be talking Travelers with one of our other very popular hosts, Mr. DeBear. And then on the 10th, we're talking Cruise Caching 2. On the 17th, for episode 133, we have a really interesting one, 3D printed maps. I know everyone's going to want to check that one out, even though it might be a little bit over well, it's definitely going to be a little bit over my head, but definitely some very cool stuff there. And then on the 24th is our next randomize, and that's going to be episode 25.
Now, we told you at the beginning of the show we're going to have another question at the end of the show. Well, we're already there. So our question for next week is in honor of Google I/O. So get that email to geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com. Have that ready with the title Question 130. And in the body of that email, include your geocaching.com screen name and the name of the first Android phone to be released commercially. That is question 130, and each email needs to reach geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com by 6 p.m. Pacific time or 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, June 25th. And you could win a 180-day membership to Project GC if you have the right answer. So we'll announce that winner and the winner from last week's Going Caching question next week in our randomized show. We also have more opportunity for prizes during that live recording, so make sure to watch live. That's at 6:10 p.m. Pacific on June 26th.
Check the Cacheamaniacs website at cacheamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads@cacheamaniacs.com, or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cacheamaniacs shows coming. Please consider making a Patreon or making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support the Cacheamaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Christoph Nauer and Daryl Wanberg. The show is copyright 2014 by Daryl Wanberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with the Cash-a-Maniacs.